Welcome, everybody. This is the Computational Sustainability Virtual Seminar Series. We're happy to offer this opportunity to those interested in computing and sustainability around the world. The virtual seminar series is being organized by CompSustNet with support from the National Science Foundation and Cornell University. My name is Doug Fisher, and I'm the Director for Outreach, Education, Diversity, and Synthesis of CompSustNet. I and other members of the outreach team, which includes Carla Gomes, Christiane White, and Rich Bernstein, will be scheduling talks on computational sustainability regularly and posting them to the URL that you see at the top of the screen. In 2 weeks, Professor Bistra Delkina from Georgia Tech will be speaking. During the webinar, you can ask questions through the question and answer facility on Zoom, or you can use chat. And if you want to, right now, you can go to chat and you can tell us who you are very briefly. And just respond to the everybody rather than simply the panelists, and we'll all see it and get a sense of how many people are here. We may wait to ask questions towards the end of the seminar, but if you post your questions and it seems convenient to do so, we'll ask Milind and Eric to if they can answer questions as the talk is going on. CompSustNet has several social media outlets, including Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and CompSustNet blog. You can see the appropriate links and keywords on the page. It's a thrill having everybody here, and it's a thrill having Milind Tambe and Eric Rice here. Just a quick bio on Milind and Eric. They're co-directors of the USC Center for AI and Society. Milind is the Helen N. and Emmett H. Jones Professor in Engineering at the University of Southern California. He's a fellow of AAAI and ACM, as well as a recipient of the ACM SIGARD Autonomous Agents Research Award. And he's received numerous other awards, not just for his research, but also for his teaching and mentoring. Eric Rice is an expert in social network theory, social network analysis, and application of social network methods to HIV prevention research. He's an associate professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Southern California. Eric received the Sterling C. Franklin Award for Distinguished Faculty, an Early Career Award, and other awards as well. So Milind and Eric, it's wonderful having you here, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Oh, hi guys. We're clicking through things. I'm a Luddite. I have a record collection, you know, vinyl, you have to put people on it and such things. So Milind's driving.
That's great. We're seeing the screen now. Looks good.
Fantastic. It's a successful collaboration. You can see why.
Okay. So our talk, Milind Tambe and Eric Rice, is how can AI be used for social good? Did you say something? Sorry. Okay. So we are looking, the talk title is how can AI be used for social good? Key techniques, applications, and results. So the context here, of course, is what we are seeing in the media every day. You see the quotes from Stephen Hawking. He said something similar yesterday: the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. We wish for those good old times when the physicists were telling us that AI was impossible and that we were really, emperor has no clothes and things like that. But in all of this gloom and doom, what is being neglected is all of the good that AI can immediately do, the kinds of applications where we can really have an impact. And it is to focus on these applications that we have together, Eric and I, founded this center, Center for Artificial Intelligence and Society.
The USC Center for AI and Society is a joint collaboration between the Viterbi School of Engineering and the Suzanne Dworak Peck School of Social Work, featuring contributions of faculty from both schools. Its overarching goal is the use of artificial intelligence to solve society's problems.
So at CAIS, as we call it, there are many different projects that we have focused on, but the one important project area, which is also the subject of our collaboration and one that we will emphasize in this talk, is AI for assisting low-resource communities. In this case, we are working with the homeless population in Los Angeles. The idea is how can we use social networks to spread health-related information, and in this case, HIV-related information. That's a concrete project we will focus on. The challenge from an AI perspective is maximizing influence under uncertainty in the network. We have real-world pilot tests that we will show you results of, where we've seen big improvements over what was feasible with previously known techniques. We will also, in this center, focus on public safety and security. This is the kind of work that we've done in the past, where we've used game theory for security resource optimization. There's a lot of targets to protect, but not enough security resources. You have an intelligent adversary. The problem can be solved using game theory, and the technical challenge is to solve these massive scale security games. In the past, this work has led to applications being deployed by the US Coast Guard in different ports like Boston and New York around the Staten Island Ferry, in Los Angeles, as well as at the airports with the Federal Air Marshals Service. So if you're on an international flight, whether there was an air marshal or not on your flight, may have been decided by this. In addition, another area is AI for protecting endangered wildlife. So this is use of machine learning and planning for anti-poaching activities, for example. The technical challenge from an AI perspective is scale, because these are massive, massive national parks where we are trying to learn about predicting where poachers may strike, and also trying to plan activities for rangers to try to deter poaching. We will show you some real-world results from Uganda, where our predictions have led to capture of snares before they got deployed, potentially saving lives of elephants and deer and so on. And there are many other projects that the center has ongoing that we've started to push, whether it's veterans' mental health work. We've got a grant from DoD for looking at gangs in Los Angeles, looking at climate change. That's another topic of great interest. So these are all problems where different types of AI techniques, including the ones I've mentioned, agent-based simulations, would all be potentially used. We are interested in domains for low-resource AI for low-resource communities, AI in the developing world, AI for wildlife conservation, domains that usually have not received significant commercial attention, but are nonetheless extremely important for society. So in the rest of this presentation, we will start with work that we've done jointly, Eric and I together, on use of spreading HIV information among homeless youth. And then towards the end, for 8 to 10 minutes, we'll focus on wildlife conservation and public safety and security. I also wanted to introduce our PhD student, Amulya Yadav, whose work we will primarily be speaking about when we talk about the AI algorithms that are in use. With this in mind, I'm now going to turn it over to Eric, who will talk about the domain.
So I'll give you a brief, my internet connection is unstable. That's fantastic. You'll have to text us or something if this doesn't come through.
You seem to be coming through okay.
Thank God. So I'm going to talk to you about adolescent homelessness in the US. So there aren't very good numbers on how many homeless youth there are in the United States, but the estimates are somewhere around 1.7 million or so. Within Los Angeles, we've done some street counts. So they do a census of homeless persons in major cities every other year, funded by the federal government. And during 2015, which was the last time that there was a count here in Los Angeles, on one night, they found about 6,000 13 to 24-year-olds unaccompanied on the street. So that's just to give you a sense of the scale of this problem. In some previous work I had done some surveying of youth who were out on the streets, and we were looking at just what sorts of housing instability these young people have. I just want to give you a couple of slides to give you some context. So of the 400 or so youth that we interviewed out on the streets during 1 week in February a few years ago, we saw that most of them in the last 12 months had spent some time sleeping outside. About half of them had spent some time in the last 30 days, And almost half of them actually had also spent time the day before we interviewed them sleeping outside. So this is a group of young people who are very much engaged in sleeping outside. They tend to be from a variety of racial and ethnic backgrounds. Disproportionately, you see African American and mixed race young people on the streets. You tend to see more boys than girls. This is a bit of a push-pull issue around how dangerous it is to be a girl out on the streets, and also the fact that young girls have the ability to leverage trading their sex for safe places to stay, or safer places to stay. You also see on the streets a lot of young people who are LGBT. So almost 40% of young people that you see on the streets identify as something other than heterosexual. And this is oftentimes one of the reasons that homeless youth actually find themselves on the streets, is because they're thrown out from their homes by their families from particularly religiously conservative backgrounds. Another thing, just to give you one last piece of information about homelessness in Los Angeles, is that most of these young people are actually from Los Angeles or from Southern California. There's sort of a myth that young people come to Hollywood to become stars and get lost on the streets. And in fact, although Los Angeles is a magnet for homelessness, it has a lot to do with being able to survive during the winter months more so than being lost in the entertainment industry. Another piece of background information to give to you here about homeless youth is just, these are young people who've been from a variety of very disadvantaged backgrounds. So almost half of them were in the foster care system, almost half of them have been in jail or prison, very few of them are military vets, and actually a fairly large number, 20%, have children, and about 7% of them are actually actively parenting. So one of the major issues that's faced by homeless youth is HIV infection. So there have been data that have shown various rates of HIV prevalence among homeless youth across the last 20 years or so in different cities. One of the highest numbers that we saw was 11.5%. Recently, one of my PhD students just finished a survey with homeless youth this past summer that indicates that about 7% of the youth who access drop-in centers, and I'll explain what that is in a second, were HIV positive. Now, drop-in centers actually are a very important thing to spend a minute talking about. This is essentially the homeless youth equivalent of soup kitchens. So this is not shelters, but rather agencies that open their doors for a few hours a day. Young people come and get food, they get clothing, they have access to social workers within these agencies who help triage them into employment and housing programs, try to help them find places to live, and also help to connect them to medical care. All of the work that we've done for this pilot has been from these drop-in centers, and where you see in these drop-in centers is you see young people who are sleeping on the streets, some young people that are in emergency shelters, they've got a cot for the night, and you also see some young people who are a little bit more stable who are sleeping in transitional living programs. The important thing also to note here about this slide is that within the context of homeless youth, 7% having HIV dwarfs the HIV prevalence rate for their age group who are housed. So nationally, about 0.3% of 15 to 24-year-olds are HIV positive. So the rates are wildly out of line, and this is what CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, would consider to be a population that has an HIV epidemic in the United States. So one of the key questions that we ask is whether or not these young people are getting tested. The CDC is really interested in working with populations where there are high prevalence rates to make sure that young people are getting tested at least once every 6 months, so that if they do convert to becoming seropositive, is what they refer to it as, that those young people would then be linked into medical care so that they could be receiving antiretroviral drugs, which would allow them to manage the disease, and especially because those drugs make it so that if you take them consistently, your viral load is undetectable in your bloodstream and you can no longer pass the disease to another person. And CDC's dream of reducing HIV transmission in the United States is really about working with these populations who have not been getting regularly tested, getting them to regularly test, and linking everyone who becomes infected into care in the hopes that that would create a cascade effect that would eliminate the disease. So you can see here in these two different, where it says wave 1, 2, 3 on the right and on the left, these are two different drop-in centers that we've been doing our preliminary work at. One of them has a little bit higher rates of recent HIV testing than the other one does. Another thing that's important to understand about these networks that we're trying to deploy this intervention in is that these networks are very unstable. So I did a data analysis where we did 3 panels of surveys. So we went to the agency for a 1-month period of time and interviewed every single young person who was in that space and asked them to delineate their network ties to us. It was a very labor-intensive process. And in the course of that, what we found out was that when we went back 6 months later to repeat this, in the one network, about 40% of the young people we saw a second time, and in the other network we only saw 20%. So there was about a 60% rollover in the one network and an 80% rollover in the other network every 6 months. So these are very unstable networks. And now here's the last trick to what was making this such a challenging issue, which was that these networks, even if we do spend, in this case, I got a grant from the National Institute of Health, and we were looking at all of these young people who went into one of these centers for a month and explicitly linking these young people who are in these centers to one another. This map in front of you shows the ties which we were certain we could verify as actual ties. But then this map represents the map where these are possibly relationships that could have been there, which we weren't sure if they were actually real or not. You can think about the fact that somebody's describing to us their friend named Mike. There's 2 guys named Mike. Even though we asked to learn about what their tattoos look like, sometimes people don't have tattoos that we can use to identify. Sometimes we don't have enough information about the second Mike to really know exactly what he looks like. So there was a lot of uncertainty into this network. Now, in this, let me just make sure, right, sorry, Milind. In this, one of the issues that we're really interested in from a public health standpoint in terms of HIV prevention is leveraging what we refer to as peer leaders. So there is a series of interventions which have been done primarily with young gay men that looked at trying to train a small group of key nodes in a network about HIV prevention messaging that you wanted to have disseminated out into that network space. And then those people go out and communicate with their friends and contacts about the HIV prevention messages, and it spreads throughout the network, and you can share information and hopefully get some behavior change. In this case, we're interested in getting people to link to HIV testing. But the problems that we face with this really focus on the nature of the network, which is its instability and its uncertainty. Hence, enter Milind and Amelia, who helped us solve the problem.
So now we will switch to real-world challenges in influence maximization in these uncertain networks. So just to very quickly recap, influence maximization, everybody may know, but for the benefit of those who may not know, it's a graph. We have an influence model I. We want to choose a set of nodes K such that we maximize the number of expected nodes that get influenced over some time period T. An influence model I, in this case, we are going to assume an independent cascade model. There's actually a variation that we use, but for the purposes of this talk, we will rely on this model. So there's a particular propagation probability. So if node A is influenced, then we assume with the probability of 0.4, node B will get influenced. And in this case, it would be about HIV testing. Now,
Milind, do you mind if I interrupt for just a second?
Please.
So there was a question on how you would characterize the general class of AI methods that we're going to hear about in today's talk. Would you characterize as decision-making, machine learning, broader than that?
So it is indeed planning and learning methods, mostly falling into decision theory, game theory, and some types of machine learning.
So this is Warren. So I was the one who asked the question. Can you sort of settle down and say, what's the decision? In machine learning, generally you're fitting a model, and I get that, I understand. Trying to make the world better usually means making better decisions. And I'm trying to sort of pull out, what's the decision here?
Right. So I will elaborate on that in a minute. Just after I go through these challenges that we are trying to. So I'll give you a formal statement.
And by the way, I apologize to everyone, but I have a hard stop at 4:30. This is just sort of a constraint I have to live with.
Okay, I'll come to it before 4:30. So we have a challenge here of an uncertain network state, uncertainty in the structure of the network, and adaptive selection. So what we mean by an uncertain network state, you have a network that you're given from somebody like Eric, which is the homeless youth in Los Angeles, but we don't exactly know how many of them are influenced in the sense of being, they regularly do HIV testing. Secondly, the network structure itself is uncertain. In this case, for example, we've shown dashed lines between nodes A and B. What this means is that this link itself is uncertain. So it could be the case really that A is not connected to B and C is not connected to D. We are not sure. So when we intervene by calling in A and C to teach them about HIV testing, for example, we're not sure necessarily they will spread this information to B and D. So to accommodate this challenge of uncertain network structure, we are going to have some edges, which we are going to say are certain edges, and some edges that we are going to call uncertain edges. And for uncertain edges, we are going to have a probability of existence of those edges. So in our graphs, then, what we have are certain edges with only propagation probability, but uncertain edges which both have propagation probability and probability that they exist at all. Now, the third challenge we have to look at is adaptive selection. We are capacity limited in these homeless shelters. We can only treat, i.e. intervene on 5 youth at a time, for example. So first time step, we select these 5. In the next time step, we may have to select the next 5. But now we have additional information because when we intervened on the first 5, they may give us more information about the network. They may say, well, I am really connected to this person, but not this other person. And so then we can, as we generate the next group of 5, we are taking into account the information we have. The main point is that it's no longer a single shot decision problem. It's a policy that we are learning. And here's basically the problem then of a POMDP model that we are going to use. So the decision-making problem is a sequential decision-making problem under uncertainty. We are trying to select a set of nodes. The world state, which is the state of actual nodes and edge states, is not known. And so we are going to get observation back from the environment as to which edges actually exist. So some edges exist, some don't. And that's the information we get every time we interview a group of, or intervene with a group of youth that we will call into our shelter. So we have to run a POMDP, basically generate a policy for a POMDP in order to maximize spread of influence amongst the homeless youth, given that there's uncertainty about the original state of the world, that the state of the edges is uncertain, and we are going to get observations on which edges exist. Hopefully this answers the question of what decision problem we are trying to solve.
So I picked up decisions are who to intervene with, I think is the word that you use.
Yes.
So that would certainly be a decision. And then in the process of intervention, you're also learning, and you call it a POMDP. I would call it a learning problem.
Well, I mean, in the literature, it's POMDP is a well understood construct. And so that's what we are going to use. You're right that you do learn some information about the state of the world. And as a result, you update your belief state. And then you take the next action in the policy of the POMDP. The challenge here, of course, is the fact that you can't use standard POMDP algorithms. The number of states is enormous. The number of actions you can take at every time step is very large. And there's large numbers of observations feasible. So essentially, current offline and online POMDP solvers are unable to scale. In fact, they can't scale beyond 20 to 30 nodes, whereas we want 150, 300 node networks at least. And so the way we've gone about trying to do this is divide and conquer. So we're going to divide a large POMDP into smaller scale POMDPs, and you'll see why this might work in this kind of a domain. And so I'm going to present 2 separate approaches, SciNet and Healer, to try to solve, to use this divide and conquer. CompSustNet is the first method that Amulya tried out. Essentially, you sample all the uncertain edges, so you get one fixed network without uncertainty in the graph structure. You find best action for this fixed network and vote for the best action. So now what you have are multiple separate networks, each without uncertainty, and you're going to vote in each network for the best action possible. These are simpler networks now because you've removed all the uncertainty in each of the networks. So those you can solve. And then we've tried different voting mechanisms. One might be just the majority vote. There are others, Copeland and others, that can be tried out that we have. But you get the best action out of these votes. So here's an example. You have one network that's been instantiated. All the dashed lines are removed, and action one is the best action. Action here would be to treat two individuals, let's say. The second network that's shown, action 45 is the best action because here links the edges between A and B, and E and F exist, but the others don't. Now, that's one way to divide up the problem. The other, the healer, which is what Amulya tried out next, was take the network and use the graph partitioning tool to generate intermediate POM-DPs. And then within each intermediate POM-DP, which is a smaller part of the network, then you do the sampling to generate smaller scale sampled POM-DPs, which again have removed the uncertainty per edge. And then you end up combining the results. So why does this kind of graph partitioning work? Because these are real world networks where we have cliques, communities of youth. And they are, so you have a clique and they have some edges that go across, but you don't have a very, extremely well-connected graph. It's not, the graph has some structure that we are exploiting. And so we are exploiting this community structure. And in fact, we can see in the real world networks we have in Venice and Hollywood that the percentage of edges that go across these clusters is small, 18 to 20%. And so we generate intermediate POM-DPs, one for each cluster, and then we sample from them to get individual POM-DPs. And so in each sampled POM-DP, we are going to select one action and we get one value for that. And now we combine them to get an expected value, and that's the best action that we are going to select for each of these POM-DPs. And then we're combining all of the actions recommended by different intermediate POM-DPs to get a single action for the whole POM-DP. There's a whole lot more to this. There is a paper from Amas of 2016. Amulya won the best paper award, so let me brag on behalf of him, best student paper award for that. And you're welcome to take a look at that paper for the details of the algorithm. But in terms of scale up, you can see, in terms of indirect influence, you can see that the healer algorithm outperforms simple things like degree centrality, simple versions of greedy algorithm, and the CompSustNet algorithm. And similarly, in terms of scale up here, also showing that healer outperforms CompSustNet, because as you increase the number of nodes that are selected per round, healer performs significantly better. And you can see it continues to outperform greedy. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Eric to talk about the pilot studies we've conducted in LA.
I think one thing that I wanted to mention very quickly was that I think one of the challenges that we've faced is, within social science, what do you mean by a decision versus within computer science, what do you mean by a decision? And really within social science, what this sort of work fits into is what we think of as implementation science. So it's not that we're creating a new intervention here. These peer-led interventions where we try to train a small number of young people to pass on HIV prevention information to their peers is something that's been around for about 20 years and has been very successful. Really the issue though is, can we do something where we can implement this and scale it up in a way that outperforms the usual way of thinking? Because the typical way of thinking about this within the context of public health, they usually refer to this as the popular opinion leader model. And so what that means is that you pick from a graph theory perspective, you think about degree centrality. You think about who is it in this network space that has the most friends. So what we actually did in our pilot test was we used Amulya's healer program with a small pilot study, and we also used degree centrality as a best practice within public health comparison point. And what I'm going to share with you here is how we did when we did this. So just to let you know, In both of these cases, this was about 80% of the young people who were accessing the drop-in center during the period that we went to do the recruitment, which took us about 3 days in each case. So both of the agency that we work with in Venice Beach in California sees about 60 unique young people, 60 to 80 unique young people every day. Over the course of the week that we did our recruitment, they had about 80 or so young people that came into the center. So we initially built a Facebook app that would actually connect people's Facebook friends. We thought that this would be a good initial map that we could say, well, these are certain edges, but then there's certainly going to be a whole series of edges that we're missing. It turns out that the number of edges that we were missing was actually quite enormous. Amongst these 50 or 60 young people in each case, we only got about 17 edges from the Facebook app. So we added to that a series of field observations. So who came and went together to the center? Who did we see eating together? When we were out doing street outreach, who did we see camping together? And so we used these to augment the network and create some of the additional edges that we needed. Let's see. So essentially the way this played out was we generated the preliminary network data when we did an initial assessment. We interviewed 60 young people. We did a brief behavioral survey to find out about how frequently they had been testing for HIV, whether or not they'd done it in the last 6 months. We also collected some of this preliminary network data that I described. We then sent the data to Amelia, who ran Healer. We then brought in 4 youth for training, got more information on the Thai data from them, ran Healer again, did it again the following week, trained another group of 4 youth, and we continued this pattern for 3 weeks. One of the things that we found out that was very interesting was that people who occupied, Healer was bringing into the center a diversity of young people. Some people that were the core of this network who showed up every day over the course of months to get services, and then some people who were in key spaces in specific cliques. And one of the things that we found that was really interesting in all of this was that the center was consistently surprised at who it was that we brought in as our peer leaders. They kind of looked at us like they were a confused dog with their head cocked to the side, looking at, who is this young person? So I showed this picture of somebody smoking marijuana here because one of the young people who we pulled in was this young man that I had to eventually go find out on the beach after hours. I tried to find him at the center for 2 days in a row, couldn't find him. Found him, he was high with his friends, passing a joint back and forth on the beach. Brought him, asked him if he wanted to do it. He said to me in his stoned way, "Yeah, dude, sure, sweet." And of course, I thought he's never going to show up. Said to him, "It's going to be 2 days from now in the morning at 9 a.m. Are you ready for that?" Yeah, I'll be there. I thought to myself, of course, this guy's never going to show up. And then to my surprise, as well as to the surprise of the staff, when I showed up about 45 minutes before the peer leader training, he was there, sober, a cup of coffee in his hand, ready to do this work. And that was a fairly consistent thing which we saw, was just young people who had not been given much of a chance by even well-meaning social workers, who the algorithm was picking because of their importance to the network, and then giving them an opportunity to shine. So what you can see here, we looked at what happened 1 month later. We did a follow-up survey with the entire population of 60 youth who we had originally surveyed. And what we found out was that 2 things. One is, had they had this is baseline data, so you see that the HIV testing rates were a little higher than 50%. So we had about 50% of the young people that we needed to reach in this network and try to convince them to get tested. That was the target of the peer leaders who we pulled in via the algorithm. That was who they were trying to change the behaviors of. And here you can see with the blue bar, you can see the number of non-peer leaders who reported a conversation with the peer leader about HIV prevention. So when we did this follow-up survey a month later into the program, what we found out was that with Healer, about 73% of the young people who were in the target population had had a conversation about HIV with one of the peer leaders. And in degree centrality, it was only about 60%. And my intuitive understanding of this network, as I've worked with these young people and thought about how the math of this is playing out, is essentially Healer was the breakfast club, I don't know if many of the rest of you remember this movie from the 80s, but it's sort of this story where you have these 5 different kids from 5 different social cliques that spend the day in detention with one another, and they all let their guard down because they don't have anything really to prove to one another, and they show their vulnerability and they create this great relationship with one another. But of course, the minute they walk out the door, that relationship is gone. In a sense, this was the dynamic that we had with Healer. We had kids who lived in one encampment, kids who skated in a park, kids who were playing basketball in another park, who all came in, let their guard down, formed a team within the context of the intervention training, and then went back out to their separate communities and spread the word about HIV testing. Whereas degree centrality essentially got us the football team, the high school football team. They were all very popular. They were nominated by many people when we talked about them, but most of their nominations are actually with one another and a small group of hangers-on. And so here you can see what really the impact of that dynamic is. So this is what 100% reflects is the 50% of youth in each situation who needed to get HIV testing done. So these are people that had not gotten tested at baseline, and we're now finding out if at 1 month follow-up, had they converted to getting an HIV test. And what you can see here is that in the Healer condition, 50% of them reported having gotten an HIV test, whereas only 33% in the degree centrality situation had gotten an HIV test. But what's even more interesting to me is the dark green bar. And what that represents is that half of that action is really responsible, we can attribute to the actual peer leaders that the Healer algorithm selected. And in the degree centrality situation, what you can see is that only 20% or so of that action, so it's really only about 7% of the target population, reported having had some sort of contact with the peer leaders around HIV prevention. So what you see here is that there's probably some combination of a design effect wherein I asked them about HIV testing, and then I came back a month later and asked them about HIV testing. There's a lot of HIV testing buzz going around the center as a result of this work. So you have some spontaneous conversions in this light green area, and it also may just be the spontaneous conversions of youth who are at high risk and they can link to mobile testing that comes to this drop-in agency. So I think really the thing that we want to be crowing about is this green bar, which really represents a big improvement, even in the short term, which is just 1 month, over how the typical public health intervention does.
Okay, so our next step here, having seen the pilot's success, is
Can we ask a couple questions at this point?
Please.
Sure.
So one question from Shushman Chuduri is, how sensitive is the performance to the quality of the edge probabilities you talked about? Presumably you don't have a huge data set that you can learn these probabilities from, so they are somehow derived from interviewing these youth? That's a question. Is there a concern with accuracy of information here and motivation of the subjects to be truthful, thorough?
So we did not have accurate estimates of probabilities, but we ran our algorithm. We did a robust, we tried to measure the robustness of our algorithms on different probability values, and we figured out a range of values in which our algorithm was very robust to values in that range. And so we picked a range by talking to Eric and to the shelter officials by saying, do you think this value is reasonable? Because in this range, no matter what value you pick, our algorithm is doing just as well or nearly as well. And so that is how we picked our values.
But it's a very important question, and it's definitely a direction that we're pursuing in research right now, is to allow for more robust forms of influence maximization, which will allows us input an entire interval rather than a single probability propagation value.
Okay. Oscar Veliz asks.
I have a question, and and actually maybe a comment from your presentation. I mean, we all know POMBPs. That's big beast. It appears that this domain, you actually have a ton of information that really reveals the structure of the network and really, seems to be taming the worst case complexity of the algorithm. So do you feel that really, by gathering information about the structure of the network, the friendship, all kinds of relationships that allow you to tackle this project better?
So we didn't completely hear very well, Carla, but I think what you're saying is if we could get more information about the network, would we be able to do our job better? Is that?
Yeah. So basically, my question is really about in order to tackle this complex problem and knowing the structure about it really allows you to better adjust your algorithms.
You're right. You're exactly right. We have exploited the structure of the network in order to, to make the POMDPs run faster by generating these smaller scale POMDPs. And indeed, one of the advantages of this method is that we are not insisting on knowing exactly the entire network ahead of time, but we learn about the structure of the network as we move forward in time.
Another question that I have that is related to this, I mean, more in terms of your approach. So basically, what you end up doing is you end up sampling and converting this into a deterministic problem, correct?
There is still a transition uncertainty, but we get rid of observation uncertainty.
Yeah. Okay. And have you looked into and how does that relate to approaches like sample average approximation?
So there is no. I guess we don't have an approximation guarantee. What we have also been able to show is that the problem is not adaptive submodular. In fact, providing an approximation guarantee is itself a hard problem, and so we don't have one. We tried to, go after this problem, trying to provide approximation guarantees of different versions of greedy, but it's a research in progress.
Okay, very good, but very interesting. This is really quite interesting, and see how you are, connecting these algorithms to, a very noble cause. So congratulations.
Well, thank you, Carla. You're always extremely generous. Thank you so much.
I've got a couple more questions from the chat. One I think is a good follow-up of this. Oscar Veliz asks, the click problem is NP complete. Is it harder in a graph? And it is harder in a graph with unknown connections. How did you find the cliques as part of the
So we are using graph partitioning, and so not necessarily clique finding. And this is not an algorithm we came up with, the graph partitioning. It's an existing algorithm, and so it's not necessarily trying to find a clique. It just sort of happens to go after, it just sort of happens to cut links such that you preserve community structure.
Minimizes the cut.
Yeah.
And one more, a different question. Do you feel this approach in turn reinforced roles as peer leaders, particularly in comparison to the norm where the staff were identifying leaders? That's from Akita Raturi.
So what I think has been really interesting about this was that in approaches where community agencies drive these sorts of interventions, they tend to either ask for volunteers or people with whom they have very good relationships. Those tend to get you, in the case of homeless youth, sort of an odd person who tends to be a young person who is fairly pro-social and is able to engage with adults fairly well, but not necessarily who engages with their peers very well. So part of the confusion that we saw on the face of the staff was that the people who they think are easy to work with are the ones who kind of show up every day sober and want to spend the afternoon chatting with them. Whereas the algorithm, because it's really searching for people who have sort of the possibility to have local influence, because of the way that we thought about this as you move from the initial person to the next wave out to the next wave out, the probability of influence goes down. So you're really looking for people who are local community leaders. those are people who go, in some cases, largely unobserved by the caseworkers that work with them. And it wasn't until we got deeper into our relationships with those young people that we sort of understood essentially the validity of the algorithm, that we were seeing, oh yes, now that we know you and we see you coming and going with these other young people, we see that you are in fact very connected, and I understand now why the algorithm picked you, but I also see that you don't spend much time talking to the staff, so I can understand why they would have left you out in a more traditional approach. So it's been very interesting from a deployment standpoint.
So I have a question, Doug. We have,
Milind, would you mind stopping screen sharing while you answer that question, just so we can see your faces as you talk?
Okay.
Why on earth do you want to look at us?
It's a graduate student in the background.
Yeah, it's Amelia. He's the guy you want to see. He's the clever one.
Yeah. So I guess, Doug, one question now is, it's 1:45. I mean, we have some 10 more minutes of material. I can just sort of stop here and just take more questions, or highlight one or two new results from the last section. But I know you had said we should end in about 40 minutes, so I wanted to ask what you wish to do now.
Well, I think it's a good question. If it's really very close to the end, I think you could finish up. But I think this is also a good time to end. I have no idea how many questions there still might be, and we want to get to those.
Okay, so maybe we will wait for more questions, and if nobody has any questions, we can show you some exciting recent results.
Okay. Any other questions?
It would be awesome to hear a bit about the other project.
Okay. All right. So since somebody said it's awesome to hear about the other project, let me say a little bit about that.
Okay. Can you go back to screen sharing?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Which one? I don't want to go. So I'm going to very quickly go through this wildlife conservation portion. So this is Murchison Falls National Park in Uganda. This is where we learned a lot about the kinds of snares that get used for poaching. And our goal in this talk, that part I'm going to focus on, is the system called PAWS that we've been developing for protecting wildlife. I'm going to run through very quickly at the problem that we are really interested in, and skip through some of the earlier work on game theory for security, just because we don't have time to go through all this. This is 10 years of work, but I'm going to just skip through all this and get to the new result that I wanted to talk about. So the challenge here is we are in Uganda. There's a national park they're trying to protect. We're going to divide up the park into grid squares. And we want to learn from past poaching incidents a model of the poacher so that we can predict future poaching attacks. And then based on that, we can then use game theory to generate randomized patrol routes. And so that's the problem. We have 12 years of data with 125,000 observation. How likely is it that a grid square can come under attack? And so we have all these different features. We tried many different models. There's one based on logistic regression, a quantum response behavioral game theory type model. But unfortunately, these more complex models are not explainable. And explainability became such a big deal. The people who want to implement these need to understand what it is that the model is saying. So we went to a simpler ensemble of decision trees, and that's what we used. There's some cleverness in the kinds of decision trees that get generated. And so if we look at past data from 2015 and try to predict poaching activities, we can see that this ensemble does better in terms of prediction accuracy as measured by this LNL score than the other models, including standard SVM, and the capture model is the one that we published at AMAS in 2015, which uses a more complicated behavioral game theory type model and so forth. But what was interesting is we wanted to predict what would happen in 2016. And so we created predictions for 2016. 2 3-kilometer square patrol areas that had not been patrolled before, that we said are hotspots for finding snares. And I had given my students a challenge to find this, and also that if even if we found one snare, then one drink for all, each of them, as long as it was found before a certain deadline. So first we found 19 signs of litter, etc. Okay, that didn't quite qualify. Then came one active snare. Okay, so that was one drink. And then unfortunately we found this poached elephant with its tusks cut off. So these are the hotspots we had predicted that were used to be infrequently patrolled. Now they're patrolling it. And then on the day of the deadline, I got an email saying, "Hey, Milind, I cannot drink so much." And what we found there was a whole elephant snare roll. So poachers were active, they were poaching elephants, and now we found an elephant snare roll before it was deployed, potentially saving lives of elephants. And also 10 antelope snares. So this is a lot of snaring that was going on that was found and was found before these snares were deployed. Our hit rate per month was 3. So there's a 3 separate active, snares that we found, as opposed to the average base rate that was historical in that area of the park, which is 0.73. And our predictions outperformed what they found in 91% of the months in that area through the 12 years. So we are very happy with these results. Our next step now is that we've generated predictions for the entire Queen Elizabeth National Park, areas where we predict there'll be hotspots, areas where we predict there will be not much poaching going on. And now they are starting these patrols, these extensive tests over 36 different areas. And we hope to get these results in a few months so that we know whether our predictions are doing well or not. And so this is just showing you a graph of different sorts of activities that were found based on the predictions that I discussed here. We've also done patrolling. I'm going to skip all these results. These are deployed in Malaysia. There's one patrol software that's actively being used in South Asia. And this is only possible because of the generous collaboration from WWF, Panthera Wildlife Conservation Society. So I'll end here. There's a lot more to say, but AI has a tremendous potential for social good across the world in many different ways, whether it's protecting wildlife, whether it's helping the homeless, whether it's cleaning up polluted river water. These are things that the computational sustainability audience is very familiar with, but by paying attention to what is possible now in terms of the social good we can accomplish, we can focus on a research agenda where we direct energies of researchers towards these problems and not necessarily get blanketed out by the negative information that's out there about AI. So since we are out of time, we will end here. Thank you very much for inviting us.
And thank you so much for joining. A clap. But are there any other questions?
You are. That's you. Jenny, all. Very good. Well, I just want to say, this is amazing work. It's really fantastic. And congratulations for your new center. That is really terrific. And we need more people doing all this good work. And now that's basically, that's a big thing. And congratulations for your center, Milind and Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. You're always very generous. Thank you for all the encouragement. Wow.
And thank you again, everybody. I think we will close there. I'm not seeing any questions come up, but I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. And actually, there is one question. Was the poaching prediction project showcased at ACM Development 2015 by any chance?
No, it was AAAI 2016. We had a video, but not in ACM. Unless, I don't know, I guess there are many papers going out sometimes from our students. I'm not entirely sure.
All right.
May I make a comment? I guess, that is implicit in the talk, maybe I think it's worth emphasizing, an outsider, that, you know, another very exciting aspect of this work is how Milind is using these techniques and really applying them to a variety of domains. So you know, the poaching, the coral reefs, a variety of areas where you know, the domains are quite different, but the algorithmic approaches are similar, you know, at a high level. So I think, you know, that is the power of computer science, and you know, part of an important way for us to come together as computer scientists is really develop these methodologies and apply them to a variety of domains. And Milind, you show that in a very powerful way, and that is really exciting.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for inviting us. Unfortunately, I think we have to go. I got an email. I see a message from Iodine, but I think I have to. That's going to be a longer answer, and we have to run at 2 o'clock. So we think we will answer her separately.
Thank you so much. And
thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And in 2 weeks, everybody will be joined by Mr. Dakina, who will be talking to us by Zoom as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Melinda.
I guess. Oh, can we all be at the same time? That's good.